Good afternoon, assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Mzansi Welcomes the World. My name is Faraz Patel. Thank you for joining us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. We are 2 weeks away, of course, from that very G20 Leaders Summit, which, of course, Hilaal TV will be bringing it to you live. And, of course, this show offers conversations with regards to the various work the committees, analysts, think tanks are discussing ahead of the Leaders Summit. So, as we prepare for that G20 Leaders Summit, one of the key engagement groups are ensuring that workers' voices are heard in the Labour 20, which brings together trade unions and labour federations across the world. The L20 plays a critical role in shaping discussions about fair wages, decent work, social protection, and inclusive growth in a rapidly changing global economy. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome the COSATU representative within the L20, Zanele Sabela. Zanele, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here on Mzansi Welcomes the World.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having us.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I think, Zanele, let's start off with what the L20 does within the broader context of the G20.
Okay. So the L20 represents, like you said, workers' interests. So it will bring in trade unions to make sure that workers' voices are heard within this bigger G20 agenda. And so it does look at what, globally, what workers are going through. There's inequality in the world, very high levels of unemployment. We know it here in our country that that's a problem that we're dealing with. We also look at women in the world of work and youth. Africa has the youngest population in the world, but then when you come into South Africa, you'll know that the unemployment rate for young people between 15 and 24 is like more than 72%, and that's obviously worrying. And so these are things that we're looking at. Look at decent work, like fair wages, like you mentioned, and basically social protection, to say if somebody doesn't actually have a job, then what happens? Do they fall through? They shouldn't fall through, the gap, to make sure that everyone is taken care of.
Zanele, we speak of inequality, and later on, we're going to be discussing that extraordinary committee's report that was presented to President Cyril Ramaphosa from Professor Joseph Stiglitz. But before we touch on that, what we see here is that decent work remains central to the L20's agenda, especially within the Global South. It's prevalent more than that within the Global North. How does the L20 aim to ensure that the voices of workers are not sidelined in the G20's economic policy discussion? So what we see is that the leaders will get together, they'll have their discussions, and push to the side, the workers' voices are not heard. How does the L20 make sure that that inclusive voice is included in this?
So you'll know that there's been engagements. The L20 has been meeting since February of this year, and there's been several iterations of this. And finally, there was a summit. And so all of that was to ensure that workers' voices are not left out. And besides that, besides the L20, there was also an engagement with the employment group, which includes the labor ministers in the world. And so there was that engagement. The trade unions met on the side by themselves to decide what the issues are that should be taken forward. And then it was then given over to the employment group to make sure that then that goes forward into the larger G20.
Zanele, I want to touch on that report. I asked you, obviously I mentioned in that second question. What was COSATU's initial reaction to that report? Because it really painted a dark picture of how unequal the world really is, more so than what we see in South Africa, where we are the country with the highest inequality in the world, but also from a global South perspective.
From a Global South perspective, you are right. We are the most unequal country in the world, and that comes from our history, where we came from, where a certain section of the population was kept away from opportunities. And that seems to, 31 years into democracy, that still perpetuates, and we haven't been able to turn the corner on that. And so within the Global South, I mean, we actually had a Global South exchange that talked about the just transition. And so in terms of that, it's very important that within the G20, the issue of inequality is actually spoken about to make sure that we get to where we need to get to. It is about those global institutions, the multilateral institutions, and how it has perpetuated that in terms of debt. Like the Global South has a lot of debt that. Sure. And it perpetuates. You keep getting new loans, and you keep paying, and it becomes generational. Yes. And so there is that idea that we need to get to a point where some of this debt is actually like written off, so that we start on a new page. I've spoken about just transition, and when we look at just transition, we've seen how the Global North has said that this is what needs to be done now. But then they have been responsible for most of the devastation in terms of the climate that we've seen, because they had developed, and in the way that they developed, they were not responsible. But then now they're setting targets. They're setting targets for all of us to make sure that but then we haven't contributed to this. And now we're being told at a point to say, this is what you must now do.
What makes it worse is that US President Donald Trump, who takes over the G20 presidency from us, is saying, I'm going to stick to fossil fuels. It's going to be interesting how that is actually going to turn out. But Zanele, on this report, I want to stick on, trade unions like yourself. How do you use the L20 platform to advocate for fairer wage structures and stronger social protection systems? Because it's quite clear that the wage structure globally is not fair. And it's quite evident in this report also,
It's true. It's quite evident in that, labor's share of the profits that are made. We see it here in South Africa, like you will see a mining CEO will be taking away, like when you look at the gap between him and the lowest paid, it's ridiculous. Someone is taking away 300 million in terms of bonuses for the year, when the person that at the lowest level, Lord knows, they would have to be working for like 200 years to get to where the CEO is. And we've seen how the Company Act amendment, the Companies Amendment Act has made sure that then companies need to start disclosing the highest paid and the lowest paid, because then it gets a bit embarrassing. It's a name and shame. And then they need to start closing. And you've seen companies like Investec, is it Old Mutual, actually saying that, they're bringing up the minimum wage within their companies. And so we're slowly starting to see that. But it's not with anyone. It's not with everyone. In South Africa, we recently had, like in 2019, the minimum wage came into effect. And that's helped a lot. That's pulled out people like farmers, like farm workers, domestic workers, construction, security, and hospitality workers out of poverty, in that now about 6 million of them. But we still have a problem in terms of enforcement for that, to say that everyone must actually stick to that floor of, because that's what it is. It's a floor, and then it doesn't mean people can pay more than that, but then it is those issues that we still have, that not all people are being paid that.
Zanele, before we go to the break, what has been the L20 success in influencing G20 labor and employment ministers' meetings or outcomes in recent years? I ask this because you've mentioned minimum wage. Is that one of the success stories? But what more can be done? Because minimum wage, yes, will obviously address one part of it, but there are certain social structures that need to be addressed also with regards to that.
So there needs to be social protection. There needs to be social protection. You need to be able to, when you lose your job, to say that, you can actually get some kind of, and in South Africa, we saw it in COVID times. We came up with a 350 SDR grant, which is very little when you think about it. But from where we stand as COSATU, we're looking at that as the basis to start talking about a basic income grant to say everyone who doesn't work at least has this to make sure that they actually can live. And so we're looking at that. But then also, over and above the minimum wage, we need to now start looking at a living wage to make sure that people are actually, you know, there's nothing worse than being having a job, but then living to actually go back to work and not being able to feed your family. And so as COSATU, we are moving towards there. Now that we finished with the minimum wage and it's in effect, we just need to concentrate on enforcement, but then we're moving over now to the living wage. And that's something that, you know, was called for a long time ago. And so that's where we are sitting.
I want you to keep two words in your mind, Zanele, before we go to the break. Artificial intelligence, because we're going to be speaking on that after the break. My conversation with Zanele Sabela, who is a member of COSATU's delegation to the Labour 20, continues after this break. Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. I'm still with Zanele Sabela. She's COSATU spokesperson, but also member of the delegation to the Labour 20. Zanele, I mentioned just keeping the word artificial intelligence in your mind because automation, that very same two words, and the green transition are transforming industries, right? What is the L20's position on protecting workers' rights amid technological disruptions and climate adaptations? Because these are key factors that we have to deal with, whether we like it or not.
It's true, it's true. And, you know, when people say artificial intelligence, in terms of work, every one of us just gets to think about it. Will I actually still have a job when this happens? And so in terms of that, it will bring some opportunities, but then it's very important that as trade unions, we make sure that people don't fall through the cracks. We have seen how, you know, artificial intelligence, and it seems to be a buzzword, but we've been living with some of it for quite a while now. If you look at Uber, and the fact that, you know, now when you go to work, normally when you go to work, you get there and you're given the resources to do your job. And now with things like Uber, you yourself as the worker are supposed to bring the tools to the job yourself. You bring the car, and you bring the phone, and it must work and make sure that you have data and all of that. And so in terms of that, what it has done is, as much as people are now, because it's opened up opportunities for people, but then they don't call them workers, they call them independent contractors. Then that means that anytime, if somebody gives you a star rating that, you know, they feel like then you're off the platform. That goes to precarity of the job that you're doing, because today you might have a job, the next day you might not have a job. And so as trade unions, we need to now start looking into that to see how people are being treated in these and there's no benefits. I mean, when you are an independent contractor, you must look after yourself. There's no benefits. You have no pension funds. You have no medical aid. And what happens if you get into an accident? And so these are the problems that, you know, AI brings. As much as sometimes it opens up opportunities, but then there's a lot more that it brings.
And then, of course, it comes to right here in South Africa. How can developing countries ensure that technological transitions leads to job creations rather than job losses? I've had various interviews with, obviously, COSATU, whether it's yourself, Matthew Parks, Ziggy Swalosi, and we've always spoken about the curbing of the unemployment rate. It's close to 40%. And my word, we don't want this to expand even further if artificial intelligence and all this technological advancement comes. So how does South Africa deal with it, Zanele?
Okay. I like the fact that when you say unemployment is close to 40%, as COSATU, we look at the definition of unemployment. That includes discouraged workers, people who stop looking for work, and that now sits at 42.9%, which is very worrying. And so when you say that, you know, how does South Africa then do that, to make sure that technological advances don't leave people behind. What we need to do as trade unions, we need to be 2 steps ahead in that, let's look at it from a just transition kind of situation. We are being told that, you know, you need to transition to a low carbon economy. But then what then happens? I mean, South Africa, we are blessed, actually, we are blessed with fossil fuels in this country. And so what is important for us is we need to slow down that pace. We need to make sure that we are being told that, you know, you now need to transition, but we need to be negotiating the pace at which we are going to do it.
I want to stop you there because one of that is the coal community, the community that in Mpumalanga, where coal is the bread and the lifeline for them, because obviously the power stations that are there. And I know Minister of Mineral Resources and Petroleum, Gwede Mantashe, has been saying, listen, we need to put the brakes on this transition because of that very same community. And that's a concern, isn't it?
It is a concern. We need to be, because that's the other thing. The other thing is you'll find that, you know, because of the coal mine, then everything, the ecosystem there, the economic ecosystem depends on that mine. Now, if you shut it down, you're not only killing the direct jobs, but you're killing everything else that's happening around it. We've seen it. We've seen it in South Africa where what used to be a very vibrant town or village has now turned into a ghost town because that factory or that mine just literally closed down. And so we have to look at that and we need to stop that because, like I said, we're endowed, we have these critical minerals in the ground, we have coal in the ground. And then this is how we power our electricity, despite all the problems we've had in the last while with our electricity. And now we need to negotiate to say the term, we need to take it this long. And also we don't need loans to help us transition, we need grants. And we can say this because of the developed world is the one that's responsible for where we find our climate right now. And so we need to be speaking up more to say we need grants, we don't need loans. We also need to determine the pace at which we do it. But then also we talk about green jobs. And so before we can actually get to that point, then we need to start training our workers to transition to those green jobs so that when the transition does happen, we don't find that people are now sitting because you used to work for a coal mine and now that's the end of it. And so we need to be looking at that. We also need to be looking at situations where there's social enterprises, where people are part of, they own part of that enterprise. And then that makes it a whole lot better in terms of how we transition.
Zanele, from COSATU, from the L20, what policy commitments would you like to see from the G20 Leaders Summit?
We'd like to see something happen in terms of global taxes. We'd like to see global taxes that, you know, don't include tax evasion. We'd like to see a wealth tax.
1% for the super rich, for those who are earning over $1 trillion, rands, pounds, whatever it may be, euros. It's a discussion that's ongoing. I know Oxfam South Africa is running something similar to that. Is that what is being looked at? Yeah,
certainly. I mean, you've seen the Forbes list. Every year it comes out, and everyone who is rich is now richer, while at the bottom, the people that were poor are now poorer. And so that needs to happen. We need to see that happening. We also need to look at, like I said earlier on, we need to look at the developing world, having that debt written off to say, give us a break. We've had this because then it stops that being generational. Yeah, that's what we're looking at. We're also looking at decent work. There needs to be decent work needs to be put on the table. We also need to be looking at women. Women in terms of, you know, the jobs that women do are undervalued. They looked at as less, but then this also then goes into the corporate where women are earning less than men. Just because they're women. And so we need to look at those issues.
Zanele, one final question. What unique challenges from the Global South does the L20 need to highlight more strongly in global economic discussions?
We need inclusive growth in terms of the economies. We need inclusive growth. We can't have a situation where others, especially the countries that actually have the minerals in the ground, this extractive kind of economy where other countries come in, they extract what they need, and then they go and they develop it, and then they bring it back to us at Lord knows multiples of the prices. That needs to stop. We need to talk about that. In this country, we've been talking about beneficiation, but it's something that we really need to get into to make sure that we can hold our own in the world.
Zanele Sabela, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Zanele Sabela. She is COSATU spokesperson, but also part of the delegation to the Labour 20. After the break, I'm going to be speaking to Nazreen Ibrahim. Artificial intelligence, yes, it's the big discussion point with regards to G20, and they have, as the nations, brought it up as a key sector for economic growth. But what about the humans and the jobs that they have? That conversation is after this break.